So welcome to this next session of Patterns of Digital Strategy using Wardley Map. And today we look at the absolute convenience, or so I called use case, which is a continuity to the previous topic that was based on disintermediation. And those are very, very linked pattern in digital strategy. So let's dive in. Quick announcement. There's upcoming sessions, a couple of sessions. One is set next week, and it is a workshop, a 2 hours workshop. There's still a few spaces left on it. And it's about flow. Flow is becoming a quite, it's always been an interesting concept, but I think it's gaining momentum and people are interested knowing more about flow. This session is actually a mini training and it does help you understand and experience flow and live it with others through an exercise. I recommend attending. I don't do those very often, once or twice a year. So please join us if you're interested in flow and learning about flow. I'm organizing another session around visual leadership with Jim Benson and Carl Scotland. We have not formalized completely the date, but you should see announcements coming up pretty soon about this. So watch this space. And then there will be the next of those sessions around adjacent moves, which we'll talk about briefly today, but we'll further basically the sessions from today into that one. So also worth signing up and attending on the 13th of March. Right, without further ado, let's crack on this topic. And just a reminder, as part of this, what are patterns of digital strategy? It is a strategy in this tech knowledge age, and how the world of strategy is changing. Something is definitely not changing, and I've posted on LinkedIn a recent podcast I did with iNexus and a few others on that panel, where we talked about what's changing, and we started saying not very much. Actually, in a sense, the fundamentals are still there, but we need to recognize that the landscape changes a lot, and therefore how we approach strategy does change. So, recognizing our strategy is still about anticipation, but also about adjusting to changing trends, and how we build organizations that are more adaptive based on that. And the tools of the 60s, 70s predate digital. So my argument is often that they're not necessarily suited for the complexity of strategies we've got today, or at least not on their own. And that's why we'll explore Wardley Maps, which has been created in the noughties in 2000s. We covered in January the disintermediation use case. Today is the absolute convenience. And then we have further sessions. I'm also opening, and I welcome you putting use cases forward, ideas forward, because I probably haven't thought them through, all of them through. And I'm starting to shape something around inside that strategy and the adaptive organization, which will link with basically aligning value chains use case. So I'm starting to shape this one up, but if you have ideas, please contribute them. I would be delighted to explore different ideas you may bring. And we're also interested in deep diving into some industries. So the great banking disruption, if some of you are in banking, probably retail banking, I'd be very interested to collaborate on this one and getting your feedback on some of the thoughts I'm putting together for this one. So please get in touch as well. that can be a collaborative exercise. The format of the session will be a tutorial style. So I will talk a lot. It's being recorded. And we mark some pauses for questions and debrief at the end. And I encourage you to think about those sessions in two ways. One is, how is the use case we are looking at relevant in your business, in your situation? And the second perspective is, how Wardley Map help you capture new perspective that help you make better decisions, and whether this framework is more useful in strategy with the complexity of modern strategy. Interactive sessions will be more for fundamental sessions. So we have this nomenclature of LeanTech, Gamba, which is basically experience and returning experience done with clients. LeanTech Trenches, which one is about practitioners and tool exploration and so on. And then the fundamental or very short training classes like next week, very inexpensive, purposefully for the community. And we're planning to do about 4 or 5 a year. And then the master classes and the cohort will build up from that. So if you're interested, please let us know. So 2 scenarios for today on the topic of convenience. The first one is around retail and around the sales element, the ordering element, and how actually I don't think digital has fundamentally changed something. It just took it further forward. And the second use case, it would be to start basically to look at how the complexity of digital products is and how convenience is part of the product mix now, and how the product mix is changing. So 2 use cases to cover means 2 maps and quite a lot of work. So scenario 1. So you may recognize this diagram, which was for those that attended last time. We covered the disintermediation use cases and where customers used to go directly to businesses to buy things. Now we have digital players that sit in that relationship. And if you think all the aggregated services around booking a holiday, booking flights, ordering food, buying goods with the likes of Amazon and so on, those people do not manufacture, those people do not have hotels, those people do not have basically the established commodities that make basically whatever you're purchasing, but they intermediate the relationship, and there's a margin transfer in that. Arguably, that's what retail has done for a long time, and that's what we'll explore today. So that use case is very, very similar to the convenience use case. And if you think a long time ago, customers used to buy directly, and I mean maybe the 1900s, they used to buy directly from specialist shops. And you had a number of artisans and trades that will sell directly to them. And then started the aggregation. The SaaS society naturally consolidated those things, which was for convenience of the customers. Essentially, department stores, marketplaces, markets, or where the customers could buy multiple things in one place and in one go. And of course, the supermarket has consolidated this even further with further convenience. Let's say in these days you got a car generally, and you will load the car so you can park your car, whereas it's impractical in the high street very often. So those are about convenience. And the internet has made that convenience where you can buy or have the whole shopping experience basically from the sofa, and that's brought to your doorstep. And you will recognize, of course, Amazon with this. And as that convenience has progressed, businesses got progressively disintermediated, and the margins as well got transferred for the convenience that is brought to the customer. So and sorry, of course, some of you might say, oh, well, but I still buy my bread from that baker. And that's true, that as that convenience consolidates, and in my mind, that got this ultimate consolidation. I don't know if some of you know the film Wall-E, where basically everything is by and large and procured by and large supermarket. But you can still shop locally, you can still shop to the trades direct, but they become more marginalized and more specialized. So you still have your artisan bakeries, probably your farm shops, but those don't make the volume. They're very much unique and specialized, and they're not mainstream as a consequence. So let's put this on the map. We are here to explore those topics with Wardley Maps. So let's look at what that looks like on the map. And for those of you that are not used to mapping, I have a little crash course for maps. Some of you, I recognize you've been here before, so apologies for covering this again. But since those sessions are advertised as not needing basically the knowledge of maps, I'll cover this very quickly. So what is a map? It's essentially a canvas where the positions and the space has a meaning. The vertical view is basically the view of the value chains towards the top, or the things that the customers recognize. It's that visibility. And sorry. And the most important scale is basically the horizontal view, where everything travels from genesis to custom built. So basically, something you make specifically and then becomes more sort of productized. It becomes a product, and eventually it becomes something that is somehow expected and can scale, which is a commodity. And if we put a map together, it spreads across that landscape, and it gives us a chance to understand, how the lower elements of the value chains, where they're positioned, and how they play a part in the strategy and how they need to shift themselves. So if we think about the position, the horizontal position on the map, the genesis is very much inventing something new, experimenting. It's a place where things have not been established. They are very much emerging. And then we move to finding clients, being custom built. And very often, as an early business, what you tend to do is you make what you sell. You have very, very fast feedback loop because you need to survive. And therefore, your new ideas, you try and adapt them to what the clients will buy. And that's already a first level of inertia to move from having an idea to actually being able to sell it to a client. Then comes the next level, which is basically consolidating what you are selling into a repeatable product. And again, there's a level of inertia to do that. It's what we call productizing. And it's where you start selling what you make rather than making what you sell. And here it's really the space of feature iteration and refinement as you learn. And of course, you can scan signals about what's happening in the market and enter the market at various stages. The problem being that if you've not been through the journey, you need to be that much more adaptive to jump into a more mature market or a maturing market. And then you imagine about scaling. So how the product you got, the service you got can scale, and it will shift to becoming a platform utility where the price will become more relevant. And again, there's an inertia to that scaling. I've seen there's a comment in the comment. I will take them on a little later when we make a pause for questions. As the products landscape, as this thing is evolving, there is the opportunity for what we call new curves, new diffusion curves, where people may use the things that have been done as a platform, as a stepping stone, and create something new, or they may redefine the market altogether. So if you think about, the radio phones, and the market got redefined with GSMs, and then it got redefined again with the smartphones, and then iterations of 4Gs, 5Gs, and so on. So here, every time, it was kind of a new player redefining the market, because that was a quantum step. And that's what new diffusion curves means. That's what new order elements can become as the market progresses. And the maps captures that dynamics within the granularity of the value chains. So if we look at an example, very simple example, people tend to have the cup of tea as a continental. I drink coffee, so I do a cup of coffee, but I think as well the example speaks more. So as a user, I'd like a nice cup of coffee. What do I do to get such a cup of coffee? I tend to go to a shop where I got the craft and care of a barista that uses some artisan coffee, that has a professional machine to make this, and that uses the utilities of power and water. And that's a very simple map to start with. Now, if I want the convenience of having that cup of coffee at home, of course, I cannot have the barista making it. So my expectations are changing and becoming more repeatable. Every day at home, I need a product for that. And that's where things like, and without making advertising here, but things like Nespresso have created this sort of Grand Cru coffee, like if it was, a fine wine, and to go together with their machines that still use the power and water to make the coffee. The utilities are not changing here. And that's the evolution, from the evolution of the needs to the evolution of the value chains below that. And of course, that evolution carries on, with the Grand Cru, and you can see in supermarkets now a lot of generic capsules, and many more people make the machines with the capsules, so standard has established around that. And of course, you may wonder what happens to the barista. Are they out of a job? How can they reposition themselves into that landscape? And of course, it might be having a craft sort of coffee for the capsules and so on. But that is a challenge when things commoditize, is the provider of the service at the start become marginalized. So how does that matter for many people that are probably here in the agile industry and so on? There is something in Wardley Map called a doctrine, and one of them is that one size does not fit all. And depending where things are on the map, it's not everything agile. The things that are very much on the left, much more Genesis, much more experimental, agile is strong. And generally, you need to have those things in-house so you can actually pivot quite easily. When you're in the middle of the map, things are more lean. It's more about repeatability, fine-tuning, and so on, and using some of the shared products. So lean is quite strong in that, with a focus on learning and reducing waste, and making small iterations. And finally, to the right, it's where you scale. It's where you're looking at really fine-tuning the last mile or the last centimeter, the last minute levels. And this is where potentially things like Six Sigma and so on can help, where you focus on reducing variation. It's not discovery anymore. You discovered, you iterated on it, you fine-tuned it. Now you're looking for the last remaining improvements. So that matters for that, because once you have that view of the map, you can make better decisions. So let's look at the convenience in retail, the convenience of selling, the convenience of bringing those goods to customers. And if we look, again, the old days where you would buy goods, you would go to high street stores or your nearest place. You will have people like tailors that will work directly from materials. You will have people maybe like shoemakers or furniture makers. Some of them will buy wholesale products from manufacturers. Some others will buy directly. And they will intermediate that relationship between the manufacturers and the customers and take margins from it. And here we're using what we call a pipeline in mapping, which actually aggregates similar things in the purpose of that map. So what happened with department store? They offered that one-stop shop, and through their procurement and buying powers, they went directly to manufacturers and to build, and the same happened with supermarkets, right? So those being new, and imagine, in the old days, those opening up. And they offer the convenience, and by doing that, they displace the whole market. So by gaining with that convenience, by moving to the right and becoming more mainstream, they disturbed the established roles in the market, the established high street stores, by marginalizing them probably. And they also, through the volume, make more of a commodity of the manufacturers. What's interesting, and when that happens, basically the retail element, the convenience of bringing goods to a customer nearby to where they are, becomes more important than actually the good itself, generally. So the map ends up looking like this, where the traditional players end up being more niche, and therefore they have to reinvent in Genesis. Why would people go to consume something artisan? Why would people go specifically to their store for something special? So you may have designer furniture, you may have tailoring, but those become less mainstream. Also, we can see that with procurement buying power, the wholesale market might become also less relevant because the manufacturers are directly in relationship and the procurement is cutting the middleman. So that's how the map might be looking. And then, of course, came e-commerce with the choice, large catalogs, the doorstep delivery, supported by some couriers, and then having large warehouses. And probably seen in the country how some warehouses for the big sort of online retailers are growing. And that may be supported by wholesale initially. But in the case of many of them, they cut the wholesale as well and created marketplace to go directly to manufacturers. And in the instance of Amazon, for instance, they started also cutting the couriers because the service was too expensive and not necessarily fast enough. And to bring that 24 hour turnaround time to the doorstep. They had to create their own logistic, and to create those logistics, they had to rely on a Prime membership where you pay a fixed fees and you're actually allowed to fund the improved logistics. So what happens is the same displacement as the convenience takes another step, shopping from the sofa to having it on your doorstep and take basically market share. They're going to displace the department store. And that's how Amazon is killing the high street, apparently. But of course, if you look at the map, you realize that to make that shift in market share, they had to actually have a large catalog of the range of goods, and Amazon went from being a bookseller to actually being everything. They had to also scale the coverage of their logistics, and for that, they had to scale the membership of Prime to allow basically to fund it. So the map, and of course, the department stores became marginalized. Some of them, like Debenhams and so on, have disappeared since for a little while, and some others are struggling to keep going. And that's basically the Amazon ecosystem, pretty much. And that's where the department stores are becoming more marginalized. They may still use the couriers. They haven't got their own logistics for e-commerce. And they have to invent a sort of niche experience that justifies going to them. Now, if we look at what's going on also now, is we have a new sort of landscape shaping as well, with larger and cheaper choices, using carriers and low-cost manufacturers, and you will recognize, probably the Temu and AliExpress trying to crack into that market and offering an alternative, playing exactly with the same rules as Amazon, but scaling the offerings even more, and of course bringing the low-cost element. Now, there is something they don't have, is they still rely on carriers. And Amazon has a more integrated ecosystem thanks to their Prime membership and their own logistics. So whether those players, they need to play on the price, obviously, but whether they're able to really put a fight without having the logistics is debatable. So at that point, I'm going to take a pause for questions, and I take to start the questions on the comments, but I invite you to place them on audio as well. But fundamentally, the point here is that Amazon has not invented so much. They have executed extremely well, but they only taken the convenience of choice and procurement that next level forward, from sofa to the doorstep, whereas before it was to the high street. And it's all the convenience element that actually makes their strengths. Of course, the logistic and what you have to organize behind that to make it possible is colossal effort. And they manage something quite incredible around their logistics. But on the fundamental of strategy, they just played convenience that level further compared to what we've seen in the high street. And once that convenience is there, it's very, very difficult, for the traditional incumbent to fight with it. So, opening to your reactions and your questions, and starting with the first question, slide 19. In your estimation, where would a minimum viable product strategically best fit in such a map? So if I go back to 19, so it's talking about this. So when you productize your minimum viable product, it depends in what context you are. Essentially, if you're looking to discover and find clients, your product is always traveling this. How quickly can you become a product is probably your MVP. All that's ahead of that is experimentation and discovery. But technically, and for product managers here, the idea is you want your product to be sold as a product potentially, which is very much having an identity, maybe having a positioning. If you think, you can buy a Tesco bag for £1 or whatever it is, a bag for life, or you can buy a Louis Vuitton bag. Fundamentally, they're both for carrying something, but the Louis Vuitton will carry the price a lot higher because there is uh, a brand and there is something that it stands for as a product that is different than just carrying things. It's a style icon and so on as well. So you need to define where your product is, and you need to continually refresh that. Some products will go into commodity, so the Tesco bag is very much a commodity, and the price is, it's the price that matters. The way it looks and so on is somewhat irrelevant. Whereas some others, you keep existing as a product and you keep refreshing the branding of them so that they still carry on their price tag. And to do that, you need to keep having this genesis to product discovery and this flow going so that there is iteration that refreshes what this is about. Sometimes, actually, if you think, the luxury goods, sometimes it's conservatism, but they need to invest quite a lot of marketing to stay as a premium product and keep basically selling the same thing at a premium cost. So the MVP question is not completely a straightforward one. I think it's how do you beat the inertia to become a product as quickly as possible? That's what an MVP is. So how do you hop across those black blocks to actually land into your product, into something repeatable, something minimum and viable, so you can start anchoring on something that then you can iterate on. That's probably what an MVP is in terms of a map. Brilliant. Coffee, tea example, very quick to grasp. Good, thank you. I noticed that the dot on the Wardley map for users was solid blue. Is there any special significance of the color, or are you highlighting that there is a center of attention on strategic moves? So I don't exactly know which one. So you probably mean about the buy goods with the blue dot. Here it's
Yes.
just accentuated. Generally in mapping, the user needs, so where you start from at the top, is a plain dot. I just made it blue here. And then the nodes that support this user need tend to be hollow. So that's kind of the official annotations. So any other questions so far? Are we good to carry on? So let's jump into the next use case, the scenario 2. And the scenario 2 is challenging the traditional sort of approach to strategy, which are very still influenced by trying to market products. So, anybody here that has done some business school studies probably have heard of the 4 Ps of marketing, which is about the product itself, the price, the placement of the product, and the promotions you do on it. And I've been working in organizations, in retail, and I can tell you that's how their marketing still thinks. It is all about trying to create promotions to create volumes of sales. And somehow the placement matter, the price, they're doing a lot of trying to have low prices on certain things and small variations on the product and little else. And if we think about also the BCG matrix, which was my favorite when I got into strategies in the 90s, it is about products and looking to map your portfolio of products based on the type of market they are in and the type of maturity they are in. So you find that ideas of maturity in a BCG matrix, like you find on a Wardley map, but it is about product in isolation, not about how the products are all connected or how the product service effectively is connected. So on the BCG matrix, what you have is your first genesis or your first question marks is things you know that have a relative low market share, but potentially a high growth. And then when they start having a market share, they become the stars. So you start start selling them, and that's how you start progressing through the maturity. And you have a high market growth. And through that growth, they may become a cash cow, so on. There's a good volume of the market. You still have a good market share on that. And that's where everybody is happy. You have products, and that's very much the product element, and you can make good money out of that. Then the challenge becomes when the market grows further, it consolidates. You may be having a relatively low market share, and the market growth is not there anymore. And that's where, in those terms, they become end of life. They call that dogs. And they're probably to be sort of retired and to get a new flow going. Now, in Wardley Map terms, there is a scale there, and then there's a scale in being utilities. But of course, there is this aspect that when prices start mattering and scale matters, it's very much very difficult to compete in that, and therefore they may not be dogs, but you may be an underlying utility into the industry, and that's where BCG matrix doesn't represent that very well. So those old approaches to strategy do not capture the complexity of digital offerings. And we're going to look at one case, one simple case, and I invite you to attend the next session that will look at the other aspects of that. And I don't know, many of you probably don't even know what a cassette is, let alone a Betamax cassette. So here is one of them, and the story has it in the 70s, 80s. Sony created that smaller cute cassettes for video, which was essentially a competitor to VHS, which ended up being the main standard. And Sony lost that battle. But it's interesting how, and it's the first case studies I looked at into strategy, so that's a favorite of mine. But I think it clarifies, it's the start of basically understanding that the product alone wouldn't cut it. And for a long time, we saw products as a single entity and the 4 Ps to get them to sell. And we also looked at how that product can become a standard to scale and basically be very, very successful. And if we look at the case of Betamax, which was actually a better product than VHS, technically it was better. It did not win the party. It did not win the fight. And essentially, it starts capturing that it wasn't the product alone that could win the fight. So let's look at that on a map. So you imagine a VCR customer, somebody that want to record TV, they want to watch films, and they want to share this with friends. Then recording TV has some constraints around the region compatibility, having a scheduler on their VCR, and the cassette duration. It needs to be long enough that it can actually record what you want. And the more you can put on a cassette, the less you have to buy of them. And that relies on the cassette and the VCR. Then you can think about watching films, which is essentially around having availability of titles that you can rent on the format you have of cassettes, being able to create your personal library. And that depends on having publisher support, which depends on having a market share. So if you don't have enough market shares, the publishers won't necessarily go to your standard of cassettes. And therefore, for watching films, you will not offer the same sort of service, the same sort of enjoyment to meet that user need to the VCR customer. And that's underpinned, again, by having the rental stores, what they choose to put on their shelves, influenced potentially by the studios. And that's also influenced by the price of the machine. If the machines are very pricey, less customers will buy them, less content will be available on them. And if we look further, sharing with friends requires compatibility. And for compatibility, of course, it's based on the market share that you will have. And maybe there is something about superior quality, but is it? So if you were Sony, based on this map, how would you make Betamax win in the 80s? So if we look at the cassette duration, that was one problem of Betamax. They didn't completely, were not long enough to really have a film or long film at least, at the quality that they were there for. So suddenly they had a lower quality that you can record at to have better length, but of course that lost the benefits of the quality they were bringing. So developing the cassettes that add basically longevity was probably a no-brainer here, and something, in the iteration of this product, something they certainly looked at. The superior quality, and when you look at the map here, you can wonder what is it connected to in terms of user needs. Maybe watching better films at home, but is that against all the user needs? And so is that essential? And it was an instinct for engineers to go after that. Forever in mass marketing, in the mass production sense, having a superior quality product will sell it. But in this case, that was probably irrelevant. And you can see in the map how it's fairly isolated. Then the compatibility, especially going mainstream, was a key element. With different formats, having compatibility is always difficult, but actually creating the standard with something that people can share was very important and was probably a key element of success. Also looking at the personal libraries, once people committed to a format, and they built a library that will create inertia for them to actually move on. So very interesting to see that there is a timing element in the market. And if you don't have people buying into your format early enough, it will be very difficult for people to switch. So the title availability as well, making more content available was key. And especially looking at the value chain below, getting the support to do that. And essentially, you realize that the strategy played out lower down the value chains. where you had a mix about getting the market share, getting the price, getting the support of rental stores, and that was dependent on publisher support. And that's very much entangled. And that's where the strategy for the VCRs probably played out. So Sony battled probably on the wrong front for a while around the quality, whereas they should have been looking for volume and price. And they made a play at the same time to get the support from the rental store and the publishers, and they bought a studio. And what was really interesting back then is how the electronics manufacturers were getting into content. And today, what's very interesting is Sony is no longer doing so many electronics. And their big business, of course, it's the PlayStation. That is a great success. But it's also Sony Picture. A really key element that back in those days was to support the electronic business. Today is probably one of their key businesses because content is that much more important. So what we're discovering here is how in the digital age, the sort of product, price, place, promotion is too simplistic for the complexities of strategies we're dealing with. And it is being challenged, at the product level, being tech loaded, having the content, being part of ecosystems, having a service associated with that. The price, becoming bundles, selling through aggregators, being able to customize price and customize the product. The place doesn't matter anymore with doorstep convenience. You can get things anywhere, everything is global. And the promotions, can you build relationships at scale? Can you make them really targeted? Can you engage customers in a relationship where they solicit that rather than having unsolicited promotions? So the 4Ps are very, very, very much challenged. And I think what we're seeing is that there is a new mix now. And the Betamax story is supporting this idea of every product comes with a content. Many digital products will come with a content. And we'll explore as well how they tend to come with a service and they may be supported by a platform. And that becomes basically everything is connected through tech. So there is this new mix. And unless people play in that mix, they're having to play on the 4Ps and lower their price and make astonishing promotions and so on to keep the sales and the transactions going. Whereas when they get a mix of product, content, service, platform, the customers become a lot more captive, repetitive, and of course, if you think the Apple ecosystem, very, very successful. So the story today was about product and content. The story about adjacent moves, we looked at services and platforms, and the story and the future sessions around ecosystem, we look at platforms as well. So thinking in terms of a Wardley map, again, or in terms of value chains, the complexity of digital tends to have the product, but what the customers tend to directly consume is a service and the content, and the product is underlying this, and often supported by a platform. And if it's fairly universal, it will also have an ecosystem of suppliers working with it. And the bigger the customer base is, the bigger the supplier base is, and the bigger the two become. And that becomes the factors of success. So we dive more into those in upcoming sessions. And we see on the map how does that mean. So that's pretty much it for today. And believe it or not, we've been through 62 slides already. And I'm asking back for some sort of reactions. How do you recognize this convenience use case in the business you're working in? Um, the convenience of ordering, so the convenience of all the sales process and the doorstep convenience, the convenience of procuring, so the doorstep, and the convenience of the product mix. All that product becomes not just the product, but the service you offer with it, the content it has, and maybe the platform it connects with. How you see those things being challenges in your business today, whether it's your business or the business you work in. How do you include those considerations in your strategy? So the patterns I'm talking about in the strategy, or are you still doing strategy in a very 4P-like fashion? And our Wardley Maps and what we've gone through with Wardley Maps gives an insight into the value chains and the sort of where is the strategy playing out in the value chain that could help you out with the convenience use case. So open forum now for questions and reactions in relation to your respective business where you're involved. Please feel free to put in the chat or on audio so we don't have too much silence. Chris, go ahead.
So I work for a university, so I'm in higher education, and I don't think there's what I was thinking when you were presenting the Wardley Map stuff. I assume off the chart there is the kind of obsolete post-commodity phase. A product has got cheaper and cheaper, become more available, and then we stop caring about it, like VHSs and Betamax. I think for lots of universities, globally today, the challenge that they've got is that a lot of degrees have become commodity-like. Years ago, you would go to a university, get a degree, and it was prestigious, and it would differentiate you in the kind of sort of job marketplace. That's still true for some professions, but for others, it's like you've got a degree, that is your pathway into a job. And as we see in the news, often that isn't the case anyway. Universities and higher education isn't going to go away, but that's obviously going to change how they try and differentiate between themselves and what learning looks like for higher education and sort of postgraduate people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. I've been kind saying that people, shifting people to the left of the map, saying that they have to reinvent themselves into a niche when the mainstream has taken over. But you're completely right in saying that sometimes it means that people fall through the map. They have become irrelevant. They're no longer in business, they're no longer present because their market has been commoditized without them. And there's plenty of them. Plenty of them.
Part of the discussions we're having now, when we're looking at how we have different people, different personas who come and do learning with us, some of them probably don't identify themselves as students of the university because we're talking about short courses or micro credentials or learning through their employer.
And even, I would say I've got a moderate view around AI, but in my approach, I'm seeing that training is no longer consumed how it used to be consumed. And with a client, we're looking at creating training at the point of need, which means that through a GPT agent where people are trying to do certain things around A3 and problem solving and so on, we're looking to insert 5 minute videos to anchor certain points based on the situation they are having. And I believe the training ecosystem is going to change, being brought more at the point of need. People don't have the time. So at the point of need with 5 minutes things, of course, that doesn't stimulate the adoption as much, and it needs to probably complement it with elements of coaching as well. But it's very interesting how this space is evolving. The space of knowledge and training, education, and so on is evolving very, very fast indeed. And the whole Udemy and so on have commoditized it, but they commoditize, to the right of the map, a model that they stretched and they brought the cost down. We need to figure how do we make a model that is more useful to the left of the map, and that for the content provider still has some money in it as well for the quality of the content. So very interesting point, and maybe we should map education later on this year. So I very welcome that. I'm involved with some universities as well, so it might be a relevant thing to do. So get in touch if you feel like exploring this topic. I've got a couple of things in the chat. I've genuinely loved every moment of this session. I really landed for me. I can't wait for the next one. I will save my question for after that. Thank you. Thank you. In the freelance job market, convenience of ordering and procuring is provided to some extent by recruitment intermediaries and job sites. I have to think more about it. So very good point, very good point. You have the intermediaries, but look at, for instance, Fiverr. Fiverr has commoditized what was a custom market with established people, recruiters that will hire temporary staff, and Fiverr has commoditized and modularized it even more, where you can procure effectively a task. And of course, they don't meet necessarily the hiring of somebody more semi-permanent or temporary full-time type people. But if you look at what Indeed are doing around digital, they are trying to get a lot more of that value chains and the whole rigmarole of getting somebody on board. They're trying to digitize a lot of that. So the user needs are a bit different between what a Fiverr meets and what, let's say, a typical recruiter meets, which means every market has some inertia in it, but you can see some burgeoning little stems of innovation and digitalization in there, definitely.
Thank you, Philip.
No place is
very inspiring, very much provoking more thinking energy, so to say.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it for today. We're just on time, and I hope to see many of you for the next session around the adjacent moves. I'm looking into things like the iPod, which will continue to build that picture of the service, the content, the platform, and will in a map it shows really, really well. So we're looking at that one next. I hope to see you all in March. Thank you all.